Hello and welcome everybody. It's Faz Kareem with Learnit, and I want to present you Excel Intro to Data Analysis using the latest version of Excel 2021. Don't worry, if you're an Office 365 user, you will have all the functionalities available, but Microsoft did release the newest version of Office on October 5th of this calendar year. And with that comes a whole new set of functions and even a new updated and refreshed ribbon interface. An interface that we get to adapt, and it doesn't, not too many changes. It looks much more cleaner, and the ribbon stands out more dominantly. So with that being said, we do have a set of topics that I want to cover. In Excel Intro to Data Analysis, I've broken up this course into 4 modules. Now with Module 1, I want to spend some time learning about what's the difference between a list, what's a well-defined list, and how can you insert a table from that well-defined list. A table is a tool that was invented in 2007. It's nothing new, but it allows us to filter data sets, sort data sets, calculations, remove duplicates, a ton of great tools when analyzing data if you are using a table. And we're going to spend that good chunk of time in Module 1 learning about that. In Module 2, the summary-based if functions, I want to learn about the if function, the SUMIF and average if. And I also include the new functions, sort, filter, and unique that got released with the Office 2021. Now Module 3, we're going to dive into a little bit of charts, learning about the recommended charts tool, what charts are available, how to edit them, and if you need to insert something called a Sparkline, which is a single chart that fits in a tiny little cell of a spreadsheet. That way you can have many of them. Now Module 2 and Module 4 are some of my favorites of the class. In Module 4, we're going to learn about pivot tables. How can I get a large amount of data? And how can I summarize that large amount of data and build a report out of it? How can I build a visual for that report, known as a pivot chart? And how can I format the report? By changing the data types, the number formats, adding in slicers, and changing the summarized values. A lot of good stuff. I do want to mention that I try to make these sessions hands-on, meaning after I show a topic, I would probably ask you to pause the video and to quickly practice, because there is an exercise file that you can download. It's probably in the description there. Now, if you are enjoying these videos, before we get started, be sure to subscribe and to hit the like button. Now, however, if you are interested in earning certificates and watching these videos without any ads, you can sign up for Learnit Anytime. It's our dedicated online training subscription service. I'll put the link for that inside the description if you want more info on it. Now, if you have any questions that you need answered by an instructor like me or any other one, feel free to visit offsite. I'll put the link for that inside the description as well. Now, as always, don't forget, pause the video and download the exercise file before getting started. Now, with that being said, let's slowly begin. So I'm inside of the Excel workbook that I provided for the course, and I'm looking at a particular worksheet, the very first one. It's called Creating Tables. And right now, what I'm actually looking at here is there's a special name for it. Right now, what we're looking at is called a list. And a list simply holds values in columns, and there's usually a header for the column describing the values it's holding. Now, there is a way to get a list and enhance it and make it a well-defined list. Now, you might be thinking, what's the point of making it a well-defined list? Because if you have a well-defined list, you can insert a table. So let's talk a little bit about what makes a list a well-defined list. There's actually 3 things that makes this list well-defined. The first thing is that the list has headers. Now the headers have to be unique. You can't have duplicate headers, and I have a header for each one of my columns. Besides your headers needing to be unique, you also have headers the headers and the data need to also be unique. So I can't have a header called Joe or a header called AT because it needs to be unique compared to the data. Now the third thing that I need is a complete data set, which I actually have. And a complete data set just doesn't have any emptier columns. So it won't have any empty columns here. Or it won't have any empty rows. It's okay if it has a blank cell here or there. That's okay. But a complete data set just doesn't have any blank columns or rows. Now, if we actually have all of these things, all three of these pieces, we have a well-defined list. And we actually have one in front of us here. So that means we can get the well-defined list and convert it to a table. If I put my cell address box inside of this list here, this green box, they call it the cell address box, I can actually go over to my Insert tab, and I can choose to insert a table. Now, I do want to mention something. I like using keyboard shortcuts. So as long as you're inside of the table, or inside of the list, we should call it right now, you have the opportunity to use a shortcut to insert the table. You can simply hit Control-T, or if you're on a Mac, Command-T. Now when you do this, it's automatically going to add these marching ants, I've made up that word entirely, around the entire list. This indicates that it's grabbed the entire data set, and it's also acknowledging the fact that you have your own custom headers. And if you didn't, Excel would make them for you. But they wouldn't be too descriptive. It would just be called column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, and so on and so forth. Let me hit OK here. So I've successfully built a table. It's in here. And there's something I want you to know. When you're inside of a table, like when your cell address box is inside the table, Excel is going to give you access to this new tab. It's called the Table Design tab. And it's not always going to be there. If you move your cell address box like outside the table, it's going to remove this Table Design tab for you, thinking that you no longer need to use the command groups within it, because all of these are primarily focused on the table here. So if I go back, notice how it's not there because my cell address box isn't in the right area. But if I click back in, I'm back in business. Now what I like to do when I create tables is I like to give the data a name. We can name our data sets. Inside of the Table Design tab, we actually have a Properties command group. The Properties command groups allows us to give it a single word name for every data set that we create, every table we create. Now you might be wondering, what's the point of that? Well, you can use this data set for a pivot table, or you can use this name to navigate across the workbook. If you're on a separate sheet, Excel actually has something known as the name box, which has a drop-down arrow, and it will show you the names of every named data set you have. If you'd like to select one, you can click on the drop-down, hit Table, and it'll instantly highlight the data set for you and take you to the sheet that holds that content or that data. So it's also a navigation trick. That's just one benefit of using a table. Now, besides that, it also lets you, this is another benefit, I'm going to go over to this next command group called tools. It allows you to filter in a much more visual way. In fact, there's something called slicers that allow us to filter data sets. And if you wanted to filter your building numbers, you can go into the Table Design tab and insert a slicer for the locations inside of that column. Now this slicer is just like the table, to where it's going to give you a special tab if you have it selected. I typically use this tab to adjust the look of my slicer. I like to adjust the look by adding in multiple columns, spreading out the buttons a bit. Let me add in 2 columns, maybe 3, and just spread out the buttons a little bit longer there. And I'm also just going to make this really thin so I can fit it at the top. And here, let me just add in a few extra rows. I'm going to insert a few extra rows here, just so I can add the slicer to the top. Now, this was invented in 2013, nothing too new, but if I select one of these options here, it'll actually filter my data set. Pretty cool, right? And if I clear the filter here, it'll go back to original. I can also turn on a multi-select. I want to do a building 3 and 2 comparison. So that gives us a nice new filter tool that I have available, known as a slicer, when using tables. There's more to it though. There's more to it. Let me insert a row into the table. I'm just going to right click and insert a row. And I'm just going to copy this entire row so that way I can have a duplicate. The table also allows me to remove duplicates from a table, a data set. The Table Design tab has another tool called Remove Duplicates. And if I click on that, it's actually going to allow me to search the entire data set. I can also search a single column. And if that column has a duplicate, it'll remove all related data. So I'm going to search my employee ID columns. If I hit OK, it's going to let me know that it found one duplicate value and removed it. And there's 37 values that remain. So besides these 3 tools, there's also a tool that does calculations for you. Inside of the Table Design tab, moving on from Tools, I'm going to go over to Table Style Options. I also have this tool called the Total Row. And if I turn it on, it's going to add a new row to the bottom of the table that I can select a cell from, and I can aggregate the column above, maybe finding a count of how many employees I have. And it looks like I do have 37. I'm going to find the average pay rate as well. Now, if I want, I have the opportunity to filter this, and I can see my total row will also filter the calculations that I have. Quick way to do calculations for a table. My good old total row there. Now, there is another 5th benefit. I mean, there's a ton. I'm just giving the most important ones here. Inside the Table Design tab, I can also choose a different style for my table. Whether that be a light color scheme, a medium color scheme, or a dark color scheme. I even have the opportunity to build my own custom table styles by choosing the color of the header row, the first row, the second row, and all the details. The font colors, one by one. And it'll save it for me to use in all of my workbooks. I'm going to switch this here. I'm going to switch it over to a medium green just to mimic the Excel look. And now we've just learned about table styles. With a click of a button, I just drastically changed the look of my table. So there's a lot. There's a lot here with tables. You can give your data sets names. Remember, we did that from the properties command group. You can also insert filter tools. You can remove the duplicates. You can turn on the total row and you can pick a color set for the table, a style. Before you do move on and move over to the conditional formatting sheet, where you can highlight certain values based off conditions or criterias and even add icon sets, I want you to practice getting this well-defined list and converting it to a table, and practicing these 5 things that we just discussed. Don't forget to come back. There's a lot more in store for you. All right, I'm inside of the conditional formatting worksheet. It's the second worksheet of the workbook that I provide for the course. If you don't have it, be sure to download it. But I'm actually looking at a list. It's a well-defined list again. And it's simply actually tracking, looks like some houses. What town it comes from, the listing price, the square footage, the bedrooms, and the bathrooms. Now, to narrow down my house hunt, Excel actually offers me a set of tools to highlight certain cells based off conditions and criteria. I can also add icon sets. This tool is one of those tools that help us style up spreadsheets. It's known as conditional formatting. Let's go down the list and add some conditional formats to this data set. Starting out with the listing prices. I actually want my listing prices to be between 100K and 150K. That's what I'm looking for. So if I actually select the column, I can select the column by hitting Control Spacebar at the same time. Control Spacebar selects the whole column. You can also click on the letter. I can actually go over to my conditional formatting tool, and under Highlight Cell Rules, I have an option to highlight cell values between a range. I can do greater than, less than, equal to, but I'm going to do between for this one. And I'm just going to put 100,000. And I said 150 there, so I wrote it down so I don't forget. And I'm also going to go ahead and change that to a green fill with a dark green text there. And I'll hit OK. You can also do it for text. I'm going to hit Control Spacebar in this column here. And maybe I always want to narrow down my search, and I want to highlight all the towns that are Jamesville, all the houses that are located in the town. So if I go over to conditional formatting and under highlight cell rules, I have an option to choose equal to or text that contains. I'm going to do an equal to there, and I'm going to type in Jamesville. As you can see, it instantly picks up all the Jamesville items there. And if I go ahead and change that to a green fill, and I'll hit OK. I can also add color scales. So if it's green, the square footage is going to be above 2,000. It's yellow. It's going to be between 1,000 and 199. And if it's red, I want it to be 1,000 or lower. So I can actually do the same thing, but I can select here. I'm going to select on the letter here. And I'll go to conditional format and I'll choose a color scale. There's green, yellow, red color scales, but it doesn't really let us pick the values we want to use unless we change the settings for it. So if I select this again, I can go to conditional formatting and I can manage the rule that I just created. And if I choose to edit the rule, a window will appear that allows me to choose my lowest value, the lowest value. No, let's change that to a number. If it's 1,000 or lower, it's going to turn to red. My midpoint, I want it to be a number. If it's 1,001, it's going to be yellow. If it hits 2,000 or up, it's going to be green. So the minimum number, 1,000. The midpoint, 1,001. That's going to start turning yellow. The maximum, 2,000. I can also change this to just 2 colors if I needed to. Let me hit OK here. It's going to drastically change the rubric that I have. Looks like a lot of green options. A lot of green options. A few went to yellow there. I don't think anything went to red. Nothing went to red there. Let's add in some red. I'm going to go to conditional formatting, manage the rules, edit the rules. And I'm just going to change it to where maybe if it's 1,700, it's going to be red. Because I saw a few 1,600s in there. Ooh, 1 second. And then this one's going to be 1,800. It'll be yellow. Cool. We got a few. Just wanted to see a bigger breakdown. I have 2 more. You can also add icon sets. Maybe I want a conditional format that chooses an icon for each bedroom. Like, wouldn't it be nice to have maybe these boxes here? However, though, these boxes won't perfectly align to the numbers. I have to edit the rule by going to manage rule with the column selected. And if I choose to edit the rule, I can actually choose to change the type. This is going to choose what I use to choose the box. I'm going to choose a number. So I could pick a number that determines what box is assigned. And if it's greater than or equal to 4, it's going to do 4 boxes. If it's greater than or equal to 3, it's going to do the 3 boxes. If not, it's going to do 2. If it's 1 bedroom, and if it's less than 0, it's going to do 0. Now when I hit OK, it's going to change the rubric to match those settings that I applied. I can also do it for bathrooms. I'm going to do conditional formatting and look. If I choose an icon set with just 4, because I've changed the settings for my first one, it picked up the settings for my other one as well. I do admit, usually when I use conditional formatting, I highlight the top row. And from there, I go over to my data tab. And the data tab has something called a sort and filter command group, to where I can turn on the filter item. And I can actually filter based off these conditional formats. I can sort by it or filter. Here I filtered the listing prices. I'm going to filter the town. The square footage is already filtered. Maybe I only want the 4 bedrooms there. And maybe I want only 3 bathrooms. So I have quite a few filters applied here. And if I ever need to clear these filters, again, I can always go and clear the filters directly from there. All this does in reality is show and hide certain rows. Much rather use a slicer and a table to do that, but it works just as good. Before moving on, everybody, I do want you to spend some time and I want you to practice filling out at least 3. You don't have to do every single column, but at least 3 conditional formats. And hopefully, I hope you choose the ones that need to be edited by actually going to the Home tab and then afterwards managing the rule. Don't forget to come back when you're done. We're going to start talking about some summary-based if functions in the next video. Another interesting function that we have available in our function library will solve quite a few problems for us. Like, for example, here, I'm looking at the pair company sales from February of 2021, and it's actually my job to figure out who met the monthly goal. Now, I can sit here and one by one do it manually. That's a yes. That's a no. That's a yes. Oh, my bad. I meant no. And mistakes like that can happen. I can use a function to logically determine whether or not the value should be yes or the value should be no. I can also then give a bonus based off that value. If it's yes, they get a bonus. If it's no, they don't. In order to do this, I have to use a function inside of Excel's function library known as the if function. In fact, it's very simple to fill out. It's just ask for a logical test, an optional argument called value if true, and another optional argument called value if false. A logical test is simply a comparison of something that can be determined as true or false. And if it so happens to be true, the value if true argument will be output. And if it ends up being false, you'll see whatever you've put inside the value if false argument to be the output of the cell. So let me fill this out here. If I put an equal sign and I type in the letter I can use my function library. I'll just hit tab to fill out the rest of it. Now my logical test here is a comparison of this cell, if it's greater than or equal to the monthly goal that I have. When I hit comma, it allows me to add in the value if true, which for the value if true, I'm just going to put the word yes. In its quotes, Excel has to have words in quotes. They're known as strings. And if not, I want to put it in its other set of quotes. My value of false is going to be no. Now, if I close this parenthesis and hit enter, it's going to figure out that they met the monthly goal. Now, let me use my autofill handle. Now, I'm going to drag it down a few. Why is it saying yes for 31,000 and no for 33? So it worked here. It didn't work here and it worked here. That's because when you actually use your autofill handle, I'm sure some of you already know, it changes the cell address in whatever direction you're moving it. So if you're moving down, the cell address will turn into 6 and 3. If you're moving up, it will turn into 1 and 4. Left and right, you're going to see the F turn into G and the I turn into J. Now, in order to lock the monthly goal value, you can simply put your cursor inside of it and hit the F4 key on your keyboard. This will lock in both the column and the row. If you were to click it again, it's just going to lock in the row. And if you click it again, it's just going to lock in the column. And one more time, it's going to turn it off. Now, when you hit F4, the top row, F4, it adds something known as absolute referencing to a cell address. So that this time, if I actually use my autofill, each cell will constantly refer back to I2 because I've actually locked it in. Notice how F7, F8, F9, and F10 are all being iterated, but I2 is all staying the same. I'm going to do one more if before I have you practice this. I'm going to put an equal sign, type in I just want to determine if the answer is yes, they get a 5% bonus. So if this cell is equal to yes, Excel doesn't check for case sensitivity. The lowercase y and the uppercase y are the same things. If it's yes, I want to actually give them 5% of their sales. Notice how because it's a calculation, I don't have it around quotes. I don't have quotes around that argument. But if it ends up not passing, it's just going to say no bonus. And if I close out my parenthesis and I hit not enter but control enter, it will leave the value, it will leave the cell address on the same value to where I can double click my cell, my autofill handle. And from there, everywhere I see a no, I'll see a no bonus as well. And everywhere I see a yes, I'll see a 5% bonus of the total sales. Pretty cool stuff, pretty interesting stuff. This is an introduction to the if function. I want to use something known as summary-based if functions. Go ahead and pause the video and practice the if function. And up next, I want to talk about some database functions that I can use, known as SUMIF and AVERAGEIF. I'm inside the workbook on a sheet called Database Functions, where I'm looking at the pair company's Q1 expenses across all the different divisions we have. And I want to figure out how much I'm actually spending on software across all my divisions. I would like to figure out the average price I'm spending on rent. And how much particularly am I spending on software in the East Division? I'm getting a lot of tickets where they have to purchase new software from the East Division. And I just want to see how much we're spending there. So in order to do this, I actually have a function. Let's start out with the software that will allow me to sum up the total expenses if it's a certain category. This is known as SUMIF. It adds cells by a specified condition or criteria. It's actually fairly simple to fill out. There's only 3 arguments. The first one being a range. A list of all possible options it can be, which is the category column. Now inside the category column, I have a criteria that I'm looking for. That's my second option when I hit comma. My second argument is software. And I want it to actually sum up the total expenses for me. So I'm going to highlight the total expense column. And that's it, honestly. There's just 3 arguments: the range, criteria, and the sum range. I can also go and hit Control-Shift and the number 4 to add the currency format. Then I can hit Alt-H and 9. Alt-H and 9 to hide the decimal places. I can do the same function, very similar syntax, to find the average. Now from here, it's the same thing. I have to look for a range, the list of all possible options as categories. Control-Shift-Down is the shortcut I use to highlight. And from there, I'm looking for I-20. That's the cell that holds rent. And then I want to average up the total expense column. That's it, just those 3. And this time it finds the average, which I can hit Control-Shift-4. And this time I can just hide the decimal places by going to the Home tab and hiding the decimal places. Now the final one is more complicated in the sense that there's 2 criterias. When you have 2 criterias, there's a function known as SUMIFs. The syntax is a little different in a sense that the arguments are flip-flopped. It's now asking for the total expense column, the sum range first. The thing we want summed up first. After that, it's where we actually list the first range. So I'm going to do my division as my first range. And then after, when I hit comma, is when I select the East. And then I can do the whole thing over again with another range and criteria. So I can look for my category for my next range. And if I hit comma, I can put J8. And that's the cell that holds software. Close out that parenthesis, hit enter. I can see that I spent about $6,000 on software in the East Division. Let's see how that compares to the North Division. Oh wow, it's almost double. Well, about $2,000 more actually. West. Okay, it seems like they did spend quite a bit more than the other divisions on software. About $2,000 more. Should look into that. So I do want you to practice this. The SUMIFs, SUMIF, and AVERAGEIF before moving on and Up next, we're going to cover the unique sort and filter function that got released with Office 2021. Go ahead and practice these. Pause the video if you need to on either of these formulas. Or better yet, I'll just show all the formulas and just have you quick pause the video so you can practice. So in this next section, I want to cover some new functions that we have available. 3 in particular: the unique, sort, and filter. On the unique sheet, I'm actually looking at a list of customers that had a service done to their automobile. And I actually want to figure out who's the one-time customers from this list using the unique function. I can actually put the unique function, and it allows me to select a column. And that third argument, I can skip the second one, but the third argument allows me to choose if I want to see all the items that occurred only once by putting true. These 3 people only occurred once in the list. Or I can go and change this to false. Then these people here are the distinct items in the list. So there might be multiple occurrences of them, but these are the distinct items in that list. Pretty cool. Before you try this out, I want to show you the sort function as well, because I can actually get this entire data set and sort it based off the units sold in a descending fashion using a single function known as sort. It allows me to select an entire data set, and then from here it asks for something called a sort index. It's asking for what column you want to be sorted by, and I'm going to choose number 4. As soon as I add the number 4, it's going to add in a sort order to where I can choose -1 for descending. If I close my parenthesis just like that, it will spill out the results with the 4th column sorted. One more function, the filter function, that I want to show, that allows me to filter a data set. I want to filter this data set to see all the product pair. So there's 2 occurrences of them. Just like before, I can highlight the entire columns, entire data set, and I can choose to include, I'm going to select this column, everything from here that's equal to pair. And if I hit enter, it'll show me the 2 items, and if anything changes from this list, so will my function. It'll add it. So what we've just done is we've gone over 3 functions, new ones. The first one's unique. The second one's sort. And the third one's our filter function there. So go ahead and give this a try before moving on to our next segment where we talk about charts and Sparklines, the charting tools. And come right back. I'm currently on a sheet called charts, and it's actually tracking the sales figures for January of 2021 for a set of salespeople. And a good way to show data is to show data visually. A tool that we have to select data, a keyboard shortcut that is Control and the letter A. And as long as your cell address box is inside of this data, it will grab the entire data set. Now from here, I want to point out that if you're on a PC, you have a tool called Quick Analysis that pops up in the corner of a data set. From here, you can insert charts. In fact, you can see a preview of some recommended charts that Excel is wanting to offer you. If you're not satisfied with these, don't worry. You can also click on More, and it'll show you a list of recommended charts. Or you can browse through all the charts Excel has to offer and pick a chart that you would like. Now, this quick analysis tool is there in 2016 and up. But if you don't have it, or if you're on a Mac, you can always go to your Insert tab and perform the same exact actions by using the Chart command group. Now, when I click on this Recommended Charts tool here, it's going to pop up the same window that we saw from Quick Analysis. where it's showing me a list of charts that it's recommending based off the data set that I had selected. If I go to all charts here, I can ignore those recommendations and pick my own type of chart, like maybe a bar chart. And I can browse through the styles of bar charts if I like. I'm going to build a clustered bar, the very first one here. And when I do that, a chart appears when I hit OK. Now this chart actually gives you several things. It gives you a chart design tab, and it gives you a chart format tab as long as you have it selected. You also get these options on the side of it as long as you have it selected. So quite a few things. If you deselect it, they go away. And a lot of the tools that are found inside of this tab can now be found in these two buttons. The chart styles and the add chart elements are both located here for you now. So if you want to remove the chart title, you can do it from here. Or if you want to do it from here, you can do that as well. Doesn't matter. I typically do things directly from the chart. I can also remove the grid lines. I can get the legend and maybe move it to the top. I can get this axis here and just simply click on it and hit delete. Look how easy it is to format Excel charts. And I can also pick a new color scheme by going to color. If I need to filter off an item, like maybe week 1 was a holiday week, I can apply it and it takes it off the chart without us having to remove the data set itself. Do keep in mind though, if you end up pulling up a chart and it's not showing the data in the way you want to represent it, you can always switch the rows in the columns directly from the chart design tab. Now the legend's showing me the salespeople and the data series are the actual bars themselves. I'm going to switch it back with switch row and column. Now, if you do format a chart and you enjoy the way you formatted it and you plan to continue using this consistent look, I highly recommend to right-click the chart. One option that you have is to save it as a template. You can actually save all the formatting that you've done to the chart, so that in the future, if you ever need to insert a new chart, you can highlight the data set, and inside the Insert tab, when you choose a chart, under All Charts, you'll see your templates. And you can simply select the template and it will apply all those changes you've made to it from the get-go. Notice how the chart came out looking exactly like this one here. And this template gets saved across all workbooks, so I can use it in different workbooks as well. Typically what I do with charts, especially if I'm going to print them, is I usually hover up to the chart design tab and I move the chart onto its own sheet. Let me click move chart here. And I'm going to pick a new sheet. It's going to be chart 1. Now hit OK. And when I do that, the chart moves onto its own separate sheet there. Great for printing. Great for printing. All right. Before I have you try out playing around with charts, there is one more thing I want to discuss. That's the use of Sparklines, which are also charts. And if you want, you can actually fit a chart into a single cell. Like I'm looking at the sales data for each salesperson. I can highlight this first row, and inside of my Insert tab, I actually have next to the Charts tool another style called Sparklines, where I can choose to insert a line, and I'm going to have the location show up exactly next to the data set and hit OK. Now this line doesn't show too much yet, but I can add in a marker color. I can show the highest point as a green marker, the lowest point as a red marker, I can also do that from quick analysis. I can highlight it, and this little icon, quick analysis, allows me to insert sparklines. Another style of sparkline that we have is column. Now, when I go to the sparkline here, I actually can change the marker color, and I can change the color of each little bar there. I'm going to put the high point as green and the low point as red there. Now, the final type of sparkline that we have, I'm going to highlight this. So I'm going to go back to my insert tab for this one, is a win-loss. The win-loss is great if you actually have negative values within a data set. So from here, I can actually select the sparkline and I can show my negative values using an orange color. I want to show my lowest value with red. I also want to show my highest value with green. So these sparklines are all showing different styles. And if I want, I can actually use my autofill handle to copy the sparkline down across the cells if I want to just copy one sparkline. These actually act as background images for the cell, so you can still type in the cell if you needed to. Although I don't encourage it, it's kind of hard to read. So we've spent some time talking about charts, saving them as templates once you format them, and adding in sparklines to show trends across data sets. I encourage you, before we actually learn about a pivot table and how we can summarize data, to spend some time playing around with charts, seeing if you can move it to a separate sheet, save it as a template, and create the 3 styles of sparklines that I discussed. And then come back where we'll cover some pivot tables. So one of the final topics that I want to talk about is how to use Excel's pivot tables. Now I'm actually on the very last worksheet inside of the workbook that I provided, the data sheet. And it's tracking some order details for the month of December. And it's 26 different columns that I've put in a table. There's about, I believe, 68 to 69 different rows for the whole month of sales. Now, if you needed to figure out who's your top seller, who's your bottom seller, this data set does actually track the salespeople. And it tracks their revenue. Now, instead of doing this by hand, like I just did, I filtered and I tracked the revenue, I can actually summarize this entire data set using something known as a pivot table. When I was talking about creating tables, we were learning about the tools command group. And I learned about slicers. When I used the tables, we touched on the remove duplicates, but I skipped over summarize with pivot table. This here is going to allow us to get this data and use it to build a report. I'm going to summarize this table with the pivot table here by giving it a click. And as long as I have my cell address box inside of the data, I can go ahead and pick up the entire table and range, and I'm going to build my report on a new worksheet. When I hit OK, the report will show up, but it'll be blank. So what I like to do when I have this empty report in front of me, I'm sure some of us have never done this before, and that's okay. There's something I want you to know. When you have your cell address box inside of this area, Excel gives you access to 3 things. It gives you an Analyze tab, it gives you a Design tab, and it also gives you this field list. If you move this green box outside of the report area, it will think that you don't want these 3 things anymore. All you got to do to get them back is go back into the report area. There is an off chance that someone may have accidentally closed this field list for you when they've emailed the report to you. If that does happen, just know that going back and forth won't return the field list. you're actually going to have to go to your Pivot Table Analyze tab. And from there, there's a command group known as Show, where you can turn on the field list again. Now, when building the report, we actually use this area here. This area that has all of our columns. They're now known as fields. And we have 4 boxes to control and create our report. Depending on what field we throw into what box, it builds a different area of the report. Now, before building my report, I want to track who sold the most and who sold the least based off revenue. I'm going to customize this area a bit. Inside of this toolbox, I have the ability to alphabetize the fields from the report. So that way I can see the address on top and my zip and postal codes on the bottom in alphabetical order. In addition to that, I don't like how I have a scroll bar that I have to browse through. So instead, I'm going to change this to have the area side by side. That way I can see all of my fields and I still have access to the 4 boxes that I need. And I can adjust this area as needed. So, in order to actually see a list of salespeople going down the report, I have 2 options I can use. I can use a rows or a columns box. If I end up throwing salesperson in columns, it builds me a column for each salesperson in that list or that table. And there's 8 salespeople, so it ends up building me 8 different columns. Instead of doing that, I can build a much more compact report by throwing salesperson into rows. Notice how it showed me all 8 items going down the rows. Now, a really cool thing that I have available for me inside the Pivot Table Analyze tab is I can insert a slicer now for the salespeople in my data set. This will allow me to filter my report instead of using this drop-down arrow. Much more user-friendly. Besides just listing the salespeople, right? I could have just used the unique function to do that. I also want to track the revenue each salesperson brought in. So I have another field known as revenue. Now, if I actually get this revenue and I have another box called values, it will sum up the values based off the salespeople that I have. So if I throw this revenue in there, it's going to sum up the values of the revenues for each salesperson. Now, what I like to do with these values is I like to change the settings for them by clicking on them. And under value field settings, I can actually change the title. I'm just going to call it revenue. And I can also change the number format. I'm going to change it to currency, and I'm going to remove the decimal places. So when I hit OK, you'll see the reflective change. Oop, 1 second. Revenue of sales. There we go. Now, if I want, I can also right-click into the report and decide to sort it from largest to smallest based off the revenue. And as long as I'm inside the revenue column, when I do that, the sort option will sort based off largest to smallest there. Now, in addition to adding in a pivot table to build the report, I also want to show a visual. Inside the Analyze tab, I actually have a Tools command group that allows me to insert a pivot chart. This pivot chart will be a visual representation of my pivot table. I'll build a bar and hit OK. And if I need to, I can actually right-click this and I can change the chart type to the template that I built earlier. That was a much more cleaner and minimalistic look. But this time I don't need the legend, so I'm just going to turn it off. Cool. Now all three of these things are connected. If I filter the slicer, it's going to filter the chart and my report. If I clear the filter, it's going to clear both items. So this pivot table has a report, a filter, and a visual representation of it. If I end up adding a new value to the data, like let's say I have a new sale, at the very bottom, I'm just going to add in a new sale, and I'm going to put my name in there, Faz Kareem. I'm going to put East. I'm going to add in some revenue. Here, I'll put 18,000. This new sale won't show up in the report until someone decides to right-click and refresh the report. At that point in time, everything will update itself, including my slicer. There's Faz Kareem. And including my visual chart. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this sheet Top Seller Report. And now that I've built a pivot table, a very basic one, a very common tactic people do is something called drill down. If you want to figure out what sales Nancy produced to make the 17,000, you can double click the value in the report. This is going to be Nancy's drill down. And it's just showing me the sales. And it looks like she did a lot of them in the beginning of the month, the first week of the month of December there. And it looks like, if I can check, let me see what she sold. Looks like she sold a lot of beverages. Looks like she sold a lot of beverages there, keeping people caffeinated. So before moving on, I recommend you to pause the video and try building this report. Once you build it, add a slicer to it and go to the pivot table analyze and add in a pivot chart. See if you can change it to the template that we built earlier. Don't forget to come back though. We're going to wrap up the course, talk about what we've learned in Excel Intro to Data Analysis. Congratulations. Go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back. You have successfully completed Excel Intro to Data Analysis. My name is Faz Kareem, and this was provided through Learnit. In this session, we actually learned quite a bit. We have 4 different modules, starting out with learning about tables, how you can build a table using a well-defined list, and all the benefits. We learned about database functions, as well as our new sort, filter, and unique functions. A little bit about charts and how to save them as templates and how to use Sparklines. And at the very end, we wrapped it all together, learning about report building pivot table reports, and adding pivot charts and slicers to them. Let me know inside the comments which one was your favorite. I hope to see you in Offsite, where you can join in and ask us any questions during the office hours, or you can post any questions on our forums to me or other members of the community. At this point in time, I do want to congratulate you. You've now completed the Excel Intro to Data Analysis. I do encourage you to check out our other videos. You're in prime shape to learn about Excel pivot tables, course pivot tables, or Excel Power User, or Excel Intermediate or Excel Advanced. Great courses that have a set of topics that will very, very well complement the topics you just touched upon today. Take care, everybody. Till next time.